June 19, 1944. 1,036 hours. Philippine Sea, 100 miles west of Guam. Lieutenant Junior Grade Alex Vraciu rolled his Grumman F6F Hellcat into a gentle turn and studied the radar plot his controller was reading over the radio. More than 300 Japanese aircraft inbound. His formation of 24 Hellcats was outnumbered nearly 13-1. The odds should have terrified him. Instead, he smiled. Vraciu keyed his radio. "All fandangos, arm your guns. This is going to be like an old-time turkey shoot." The pilots around him, veterans of carrier warfare in the Pacific, responded with calm acknowledgments. No panic, no fear, just professional readiness. 2 years earlier, these numbers would have meant certain death for American naval aviators. But this wasn't 1942. This was June 1944, and the hunters had become the hunted. What Vraciu and his squadron were about to do would become the most one-sided aerial slaughter in naval history. In the next 8 hours, American Hellcat pilots would destroy 476 Japanese aircraft for the loss of 29 American planes, a kill ratio of over 16-1. Vraciu himself would shoot down 6 enemy bombers in 8 minutes, later describing it as like killing ducks in a shooting gallery. But the real story wasn't just about one day's massacre. It was about how American engineering transformed terror into dominance, how industrial philosophy defeated martial elegance, and how a fighter derided as too heavy by Japanese intelligence became the weapon that systematically destroyed Japanese naval aviation. This is the story of the Grumman F6F Hellcat and how it turned the Pacific War into a one-sided slaughter. February 20th, 1942. 0957 hours. 14,000 feet above Darwin, Australia. Flight Petty Officer Hajime Toyoshima, flying a Mitsubishi A6M20 from the carrier Hiryu, watched the 8 American P-40 Warhawks climbing desperately toward his formation. The veteran of Pearl Harbor and the Dutch East Indies campaign felt almost sorry for them. Almost. The Zero had made Japanese naval aviators masters of the Pacific sky. At 3,704 pounds empty weight, powered by a 940 horsepower Sakai engine, it could outclimb, outturn, and outrange any fighter the Allies could field. Its 1,929-mile range allowed it to appear hundreds of miles from its carrier, striking where enemies thought they were safe. Its turning radius was so tight that American pilots who tried a dogfight died within seconds. Toyoshima and his wingmen tore through the American formation like wolves through sheep. The P-40s, heavy and underpowered, couldn't climb with the Zeros, couldn't turn with them, couldn't escape. In 15 minutes, all 8 American fighters were burning wreckage scattered across the Australian outback. Not a single Zero took serious damage. The pattern repeated across the Pacific. At Pearl Harbor, Wake Island, the Philippines, Java, everywhere Japanese naval aviation appeared, Allied fighters fell like rain. The Grumman F6F Wildcat, the U.S. Navy's frontline fighter, was hopelessly outmatched. Slower, less maneuverable, shorter ranged, it survived only because American pilots developed desperate hit-and-run tactics. Fighting a Zero in a turning battle meant death. Lieutenant Commander John Thatch, who developed the famous Thatch-Weave defensive tactic, described the reality of early Pacific air combat with brutal honesty. The Zero could outclimb us, outturn us, outrun us at cruise speed, and had twice our range. Fighting them was like bringing a knife to a gunfight. We survived through teamwork and discipline, but we were dying. Every mission, we were dying. Japanese pilot Saburo Sakai, who would become Japan's third-ranking ace with 64 victories, wrote in his combat diary from April 1942, "The Americans are brave, but their fighters are obsolete. We shoot them down with ease. Their heavy fighters cannot maneuver. Their pilots lack training. This war will be over before summer." The Japanese high command agreed. Their elegant, lightweight philosophy of fighter design had proven superior. The war in the Pacific would be won by the samurai of the air, flying the finest fighter aircraft ever built. But 3,000 miles away, in a nondescript building on Long Island, New York, a team of American engineers was studying the pieces of a puzzle that would doom Japanese aviation. On July 11, 1942, a nearly intact Mitsubishi F6M-20 had crash-landed on a Kutan island in the Aleutians. The pilot, killed in the landing, had inadvertently handed America its greatest intelligence prize of the Pacific War. The Akutan Zero was shipped to Naval Air Station North Island in San Diego, where engineers and test pilots systematically discovered every weakness in the legendary Japanese fighter. They found that the Zero's remarkable performance came at a terrible cost. No armor protection for the pilot. No self-sealing fuel tanks. A structure so light that high-speed maneuvers could literally tear the wings off. A canopy that couldn't be opened at speeds above 200 miles per hour, trapping pilots in damaged aircraft. Leroy Grumman, the taciturn engineer who had founded Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation in 1929, read the reports with growing excitement. His company had built the F6F Hellcat on a philosophy that contradicted everything Japanese designers believed. Grumman's fighters were heavy, rugged, and brutally simple. Pilots called them ironworks because they brought you home. Now, armed with complete knowledge of the Zero's strengths and weaknesses, Grumman could design its executioner. The design brief for the F6F was radical in its simplicity: build a fighter that could kill Zeros, not outmaneuver them. That was impossible with American pilot training time and aircraft weight requirements. Kill them through superior firepower, superior armor, superior altitude performance, and superior survivability. If American pilots couldn't dogfight, give them a fighter that didn't need to. The F6F-3 prototype that first flew on June 26, 1942, just 15 days after the Akutan Zero was captured, embodied this philosophy completely. It was enormous compared to the Zero. Where the Japanese fighter weighed 3,704 pounds empty, the Hellcat weighed 9,238 pounds. Where the Zero had two 7.7 mm machine guns and two 20 mm cannon with limited ammunition, the Hellcat carried 6.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns with 400 rounds per gun, 2,400 rounds total. The armor protection was unprecedented in a carrier fighter. A bullet-resistant windscreen. Heavy armor plate behind the pilot's head and back. Armored protection for the oil cooler and oil tank. Self-sealing fuel tanks that could take multiple hits and keep flying. The Japanese philosophy sacrificed protection for performance. The American philosophy accepted the weight penalty because dead pilots couldn't learn from experience. Most significantly, the Hellcat used the same Pratt & Whitney, our 2800 double Wasp engine, as the P-47 Thunderbolt, an 18-cylinder radial producing 2,000 horsepower. This engine, one of the most reliable ever built, gave the Hellcat a 380 miles per hour top speed and a climb rate that could match the Zero at altitudes above 10,000 feet. The Americans had studied the Akutan Zero and discovered that its performance degraded dramatically above 20,000 feet. The Hellcat was optimized for high-altitude combat where the Zero became sluggish. Test pilot Robert Hall, flying the F6F-3 for the first time, reported, "It flies like a Cadillac. Heavy, solid, powerful. You don't finesse it like a Zero, you point it where you want to go, and it goes there. The visibility is excellent, the controls are responsive, and the aircraft feels indestructible. This is a pilot's fighter. It does everything you ask and forgives your mistakes." The production decision was made before testing was even complete. Grumman received a contract for 1,080 aircraft in October 1942, an unprecedented show of confidence. The company's Bethpage, Long Island factory was retooled. By January 1943, Hellcats were rolling off the production line at a rate that would soon reach one aircraft every hour. The Iron Works was building the Zero killer in quantities Japan couldn't match. Japanese intelligence, monitoring American aircraft production through neutral sources and capture documents, dismissed the Hellcat as irrelevant. Reports filed with the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service in March 1943 described it as excessively heavy fighter with insufficient maneuverability. No threat to experienced pilots in turning combat. Range insufficient for Pacific operations. Assessment. Minor concern. They were about to discover how catastrophically wrong they were. August 31st, 1943. 0615 hours. USS Essex, operating 130 miles northwest of Marcus Island. Commander Edward Butch O'Hare, leading F6F Hellcats on their combat debut, listened as the briefing officer described the target. Marcus Island, a fortified Japanese outpost, would be hit by bombing strikes. The Hellcats would provide cover, their first combat test against the legendary Zero. The pilots were nervous. They'd trained in a Hellcat for months, but training and combat were different universes. The Zero's reputation preceded it. Invincible, unstoppable, death to anyone foolish enough to try turning with it. O'Hare, already a Medal of Honor recipient for his Wildcat exploits, tried to calm them. Stick to your training. Don't try to be heroes. Use your speed, use your altitude, use your firepower. The Hellcat gives you all three. The strike package encountered a dozen Zeros over the island at 18,000 feet. The Japanese pilots, veterans of China and the Solomons campaign, immediately attempted their proven tactic, forcing a turning fight where their superior maneuverability would dominate. O'Hare's response became textbook Hellcat doctrine. He dove, building speed to over 400 miles per hour, then pulled up into a zoom climb that left the Zeros struggling to follow. At 22,000 feet, with the Zeros laboring in the thin air, O'Hare rolled inverted and dove again, this time with 6.50 caliber guns charged and ready. The convergence zone, where all 6 guns' ballistic paths intersected, was set at 300 yards. When O'Hare opened fire at that range, the result shocked even him. The Zero he targeted didn't just fall, it disintegrated. Wings folded upward, the fuselage broke in half, and the fuel tanks erupted in a fireball. The battle lasted 12 minutes. 3 Zeros destroyed for no American losses. But the kill count wasn't what impressed the pilots. It was the damage their Hellcats had absorbed. Lieutenant J.G. Robert Duncan's fighter took 7 7.7mm hits and 2 20mm cannon strikes. The armor stopped everything. The self-sealing tanks sealed. He flew the damaged Hellcat back to the carrier and landed without incident. The combat reports filed after the Marcus Island strike began changing American tactical doctrine. The Hellcat wasn't a better dogfighter than the Zero. It was a different kind of fighter entirely. It fought from altitude, using speed and firepower to kill without ever entering a turning contest. Pilot survival rates in the Hellcat were 3 times higher than in the Wildcat. Dead pilots couldn't share lessons. Live pilots got better, but the Japanese were adapting too. By November 1943, Zero pilots had developed countertactics. They'd avoid head-on passes where the Hellcat's 6 guns were devastating. They'd fight at low altitude where the Zero's agility advantage was greatest. They'd target damaged Hellcats struggling back to their carriers. The war in the Pacific remained brutal, contested, and deadly. Then came the turkey shoot. The plan was called Operation A-Go, Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's last desperate gamble to destroy American carrier forces in a single decisive battle. On June 19, 1944, the Japanese mobile fleet launched over 300 aircraft, Zeros, Judy dive bombers, Jill torpedo bombers, against Task Force 58 off the coast of the Mariana Islands. Ozawa's intelligence told him the Americans had approximately 450 fighters. The numbers seemed manageable. The Japanese still believed in the superiority of their pilots and aircraft. What Ozawa didn't know, what Japanese intelligence had completely failed to grasp, was the transformation that had occurred in American naval aviation. The pilots manning those Hellcats weren't the desperate, undertrained kids of 1942. They were products of the most comprehensive flight training program ever created. Each pilot had a minimum of 300 hours of flight training before reaching combat, including extensive gunnery practice, carrier landing qualification, and combat tactics training against captured Zeros and other enemy aircraft. The Hellcats they flew weren't the prototypes of 1943. These were F6F 5 variants with improved engines, refined aerodynamics, and combat modifications based on 2 years of Pacific combat. Each aircraft represented 45,000 man-hours of labor, built to tolerances that Japanese factories, starved of materials and machine tools, couldn't approach. More crucially, the Americans had something the Japanese couldn't match: radar-directed fighter control. The new SK air search radar could detect incoming raids at over 100 miles. Fighter directors aboard the carriers could vector Hellcat formations directly into the path of incoming strikes, eliminating the guesswork and luck that had defined earlier battles. The Japanese were flying into a carefully coordinated killing machine. At 1,000 hours, the first Japanese strike wave, 69 aircraft, appeared on American radar screens 140 miles out. 12 Hellcat divisions, a total of 48 fighters, were vectored to intercept. Among them was Lieutenant G.G. Alex Vraciu, flying from USS Lexington with F-16. Vraciu, already an ace with 11 victories, climbed his division to 20,000 feet and waited. The Japanese bombers, Yokosuka D-4 dive bombers, were flying in neat formation at 18,000 feet with zero escort above at 22,000 feet. The Hellcats had the altitude advantage, the golden position in fighter combat. What happened next was less a battle than an execution. Vraciu rolled his Hellcat into a diving attack that brought him to 400 miles per hour, far too fast for the Zeros to intercept. His first burst caught a Judy perfectly, all 6 guns converging. The Japanese bomber exploded so violently that Vraciu had to pull up hard to avoid the debris. He pulled back up to altitude, dove again, fired another 2-second burst. Another Judy destroyed. In the next 8 minutes, Vraciu would shoot down 6 Japanese aircraft, emptying all 2,400 rounds of his ammunition. His wingmen claimed 4 more. The Japanese formation was annihilated before reaching the American fleet. Vraciu's comm radio transmission became legendary. Judas splashed, returning to base. Out of ammo. Across the Philippine Sea, similar slaughters were occurring. Commander David McCampbell, leading the Essex Air Group, shot down 7 Japanese aircraft in a single engagement. Ensign Wilbur Spider Webb destroyed 4 Zeros in 3 minutes. The new pilots, fresh from training, were performing like veterans because their training had been that comprehensive. The second Japanese strike wave of 128 aircraft launched at noon fared even worse. American radar detected them at 115 miles. Every available Hellcat, over 200 fighters, was vectored to intercept. The Japanese formation was torn apart 60 miles from the fleet. 40 Japanese aircraft were destroyed in 15 minutes. Only 30 reached the American ships, where they encountered a wall of anti-aircraft fire. 20 more were destroyed. 10 survived to escape. Not a single torpedo or bomb hit an American carrier. The third and fourth strikes suffered the same fate. By nightfall on June 19th, the Japanese had lost 476 aircraft. American losses, 29 fighters, mostly to accidents and anti-aircraft fire from their own ships. The kill ratio was over 16-1. Japanese naval aviation, which had terrorized the Pacific since Pearl Harbor, had been effectively destroyed in a single day. Lieutenant J.G.J.R. Strain, returning to USS Bunker Hill after shooting down 3 Zeros, summed up the day's action in his combat report with stunning simplicity. It was like shooting ducks in a gallery. They didn't have a chance. Our training, our aircraft, our tactics, everything worked. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. In the ready rooms that evening, pilots sat in stunned silence, processing what they'd just experienced. Some had empty ammunition bays, every round fired, every round a hit. Others had battle damage that would have been fatal in a Zero, but were mere inconveniences in a Hellcat. The Iron Works philosophy had been validated with Japanese blood. But the most telling moment came from a captured Japanese pilot, fish from the sea after ejecting from his burning Zero. During interrogation aboard USS Lexington, he asked his captors a single question: "What kind of fighter is that? It absorbs our fire like armor plate and shoots us down like we're training targets." In China, we dominated the sky. Over Darwin, we were unstoppable. Today, we died in numbers I cannot comprehend. What changed? The answer was simple: everything. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, as it became known, wasn't an anomaly. It was a preview of how the rest of the Pacific War would unfold. Month after month, the Hellcat kill ratios climbed. July 1944, 18:1. August, 17:1. September, 21:1. The Japanese were being systematically hunted to extinction. October 24th, 1944. Leyte Gulf, Philippines. Commander David McCampbell, leading a 7-plane division from USS Essex, encountered a Japanese formation of over 60 aircraft, Zeros, Oscars, and bombers heading for American landing forces. The odds were nearly 9-1 against the Americans. McCampbell didn't retreat. He attacked. For 90 minutes, McCampbell and his wingmen engaged the entire Japanese formation in a running battle that stretched across 200 miles of Philippine sky. Using classic Hellcat tactics, dive, shoot, climb, repeat, McCampbell personally destroyed 9 aircraft, bringing his total to 34 victories, making him the U.S. Navy's all-time leading ace. His wingmen claimed 6 more. When McCampbell finally landed back on Essex, his Hellcats' guns were so hot they'd begun to warp. He'd fired every single round of ammunition. The after-action report noted something chilling. Enemy pilot quality noticeably degraded. Multiple targets showed poor situational awareness and defensive tactics. Several aircraft destroyed showed no evasive action whatsoever. Assessment: enemy pilot training standards have collapsed. The assessment was correct. By late 1944, Japan was sending pilots into combat with as little as 50 hours of total flight time. The American Air Training Program was graduating pilots with over 300 hours, including 100 hours in the Hellcat specifically. The experience gap was so vast that combat had become a slaughter. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, one of the few veteran pilots still alive, wrote in his diary from October 1944, "The Americans have learned everything. They fight from altitude where our Zeros are weak. They use speed we cannot match. Their aircraft absorb damage that would destroy 3 Zeros. Most painfully, their pilots are now better trained than ours. We are sending children to fight professionals. I watch them die and can do nothing." The Hellcat is not the best fighter in the world, but it is the right fighter for this war. It is built to bring pilots home. Ours is built for glory. Glory does not win wars. The production numbers told the story of inevitable defeat. Grumman's Bethpage factory, working around the clock with largely female workforce, the men were fighting, produced 1 Hellcat every 60 minutes at peak production. 12,275 Hellcats were built between 1942 and 1945. Japan's total fighter production for the entire war was approximately 28,000 aircraft of all types. The Americans were building one model of carrier fighter faster than Japan could replace all combat losses. The human element was equally stark. By 1945, the average American Hellcat pilot had over 300 hours of flight time and had practice gunnery against towed targets until they could hit consistently. The average Japanese pilot had minimal time in their aircraft and often fired their guns for the first time in actual combat. The result was predictable. Lieutenant Eugene Valencia, who pioneered the mowing machine formation tactics that allowed Hellcats to clear entire sections of sky, described engaging Japanese fighters in early 1945. It wasn't combat anymore. It was murder. They'd fly straight and level, making themselves perfect targets. When we'd attack, they'd try to turn fight, playing into our hands. They were flying Zeros like it was 1942, using tactics that hadn't worked in 2 years. We'd destroy entire formations without taking a scratch. The stark reality was captured in a single statistic. The F6F Hellcat destroyed 5,163 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, while losing only 270 Hellcats to enemy aircraft, a kill ratio of 19.1-1. The Hellcat accounted for approximately 75% of all enemy aircraft destroyed by U.S. Navy carrier-based fighters. No other aircraft in history has dominated a conflict so completely. But the numbers don't capture the human tragedy. Japanese pilots burning alive in unarmored Zeros. American pilots returning with aircraft that looked like Swiss cheese but still flew, and the systematic destruction of an entire generation of Japanese naval aviators. By war's end, Japan had virtually no experienced pilots remaining. America had thousands, many of them aces with 5 or more victories. The philosophy gap was never clearer than in the contrast between the Zero and the Hellcat. The Zero represented Japanese aesthetic values. Elegant, lightweight, pure in purpose. Every gram of weight was carefully considered. Every design choice optimized performance. It was a beautiful aircraft, perhaps the most aesthetically perfect fighter of its era. The Hellcat was ugly. Stubby, thick-winged, with a greenhouse canopy that looked tacked on as an afterthought. Its landing gear was wide and sturdy, designed for rough carrier landings by tired pilots, not aerodynamic perfection. Its construction was overbuilt, over-engineered, and over-armored. It represented American industrial values. Practical, survivable, mass-producible. In a one-on-one duel between a Zero and Hellcat, with equal pilot skill, the Zero could theoretically win through superior maneuverability. But wars aren't fought in one-on-one duels. They're fought by industrial systems producing trained pilots in overwhelming numbers, flying aircraft that bring them home to fight again. Ensign Arden Ives, whose Hellcat took 23 hits from a Zero in a February 1945 engagement over Iwo Jima, survived because of Grumman's philosophy. The armor stopped the bullets. The self-sealing tank sealed. The rugged R-2800 engine, the same power plant that made the P-47 nearly indestructible, kept running with 3 cylinders shot out. Oz made it back to his carrier, landed safely, and flew the next day's mission in a new aircraft. Grumman saved my life, he wrote to his parents. The Japanese shot me to pieces and I flew home. Their pilots don't get second chances. We do. That's why we're winning. The final accounting of the Pacific Air War tells a story of systematic destruction. The Hellcat destroyed more enemy aircraft than any other Allied fighter. Its kill ratio of 19-1 remains the highest of any fighter aircraft in a major conflict. Grumman produced 12,275 Hellcats at a cost of approximately $50,000 each. Japan couldn't replace the pilots those Hellcats killed at any price. In the post-war years, as wounds healed and enemies became friends, Japanese and American pilots met at reunions to discuss their experiences. At a 1990 gathering in San Diego, Saburo Sakai, now elderly, blind in one eye from combat wounds, sat next to Roy Voris, a Hellcat ace with 6 victories. Sakai was asked to compare the Zero and the Hellcat. His response, translated from Japanese, captured everything. The Zero was the most beautiful fighter ever built. Elegant, pure, perfect in its purpose. Flying it was like wearing a kimono. It became part of you. But it was designed for a short war and superior pilots. When the war became long and our pilots became inexperienced, the Zero's weaknesses killed them. No armor meant every hit could be fatal. No self-sealing tanks meant fire was inevitable. Light structure meant it broke apart under stress. The Zero was designed for masters. The Hellcat was designed for everyone. Any pilot could fly it. Any pilot could survive in it. Any pilot could kill in it. That is why you won. Not because your aircraft was better in the abstract, but because it was better for the war that was actually fought. You built a fighter that matched your industrial system, your pilot training system, your military philosophy. We built a fighter that matched our aesthetics. Aesthetics don't win wars. At the National Museum of Naval Aviation in Pensacola, Florida, a restored F6F Hellcat sits in the place of honor, surrounded by the aircraft it replaced and the enemies it destroyed. The placard lists the statistics: 12,275 built, 5,163 enemy aircraft destroyed, 19.1-1 kill ratio, 75% of U.S. Navy kills. But those numbers, as staggering as they are, don't tell the real story. The real story is told in the maintenance logs that show Hellcats flying combat missions with 50 or more battle damage repairs. It's told in the gun camera footage showing Zeros disintegrating under the converged fire of 6.50 caliber machine guns. It's told in the pilot testimonies of men who flew the Hellcat and lived when they should have died. The F6F Hellcat wasn't the fastest fighter of World War II. It wasn't the most maneuverable. It wasn't the most heavily armed. It wasn't the longest ranged. But it was the right combination of all those qualities, built in numbers the enemy couldn't match, flown by pilots trained better than the enemy could afford, supported by an industrial system the enemy couldn't comprehend. When Japanese pilots first encountered the Hellcat in 1943, they called it easy prey, another heavy American fighter that their nimble Zeros would slaughter. By 1945, those same pilots who survived called it something else, the Hunter. The transformation took less than 2 years. In that time, the Grumman Hellcat didn't just defeat Japanese naval aviation, it annihilated it. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot of June 19th, 1944 stands as the perfect encapsulation of that transformation. 300 Japanese aircraft destroyed in a single day. The sky turned into a shooting gallery. Experienced American pilots describing it as easy and like duck hunting. The psychological impact on surviving Japanese aviators was complete and permanent. The final word belongs to an anonymous Japanese pilot, captured after ejecting from his burning Zero over Okinawa in April 1945. During interrogation, he was shown photographs of various American aircraft and asked to identify them. When shown the Hellcat, he began to cry. Through an interpreter, he explained, "I flew 83 missions. I saw that airplane on 70 of them. Every time we lost pilots. Every time they came home. I watched my friends burn because our aircraft had no protection. I watched Americans fly home with aircraft that should have fallen from the sky. I learned to fear that sound, the 6 guns firing together. We called it the door to hell opening. When you heard that sound, you knew someone was dying. Usually it was one of us." The Grumman F6F Hellcat entered combat as an improved design against an enemy that had ruled the Pacific sky for 3 years. It ended the war as the most successful fighter aircraft in naval history, having systematically hunted its enemies to near extinction. The transformation from Zero to hero, from skepticism to dominance, took less than 18 months. In that time, the Hellcat proved that in modern warfare, the perfect aircraft is the one that multiplies the effectiveness of the system behind it. The Zero was a masterpiece of aeronautical art. The Hellcat was a masterpiece of industrial war. Art is admired in museums. Industrial war wins. The sky above the Pacific, once owned by the rising sun, belonged to Grumman by war's end. Japan called it easy prey. It hunted them to extinction. And the American pilots who flew it, many of them barely old enough to drink, went home to tell their stories. The Japanese pilots they faced didn't get that chance. That's what a 19-to-1 kill ratio means. For every American who died, 19 Japanese were already gone. The thunder of the Hellcat's guns fell silent in 1945, but its lesson echoes still. Don't build the perfect fighter. Build the right one, and build it by the thousands.